Hello everyone, I'm going to be talking about introverted thinking in the first slot for the ISTPs and the INTPs. Some examples of TI are deductive reasoning. I went over this in my TE versus TI video, so I recommend checking that out if you haven't already. Accuracy. TI is kind of like an internal framework that is constantly expanding as the TI DOM gets older, and of course TI is a subjective introverted function that likes to process and judge logical information. In order to be accepted into that framework, it must have consistency and validity, in the sense that if something is valid and consistent, it can be accepted, whereas if something is invalid, it must be rejected because it's faulty and prone to inaccuracy. Another keyword you'll hear with TI is truth. I want to keep this to a lowercase t just because I view TI as corresponding to the left hemisphere of the brain, where it likes to deal with mathematical and scientific proofs. In order to arrive at truth with the capital T, which of course TI DOMs can do, they're going to need to take into consideration the other functions to arrive at a more holistic intelligence and a holistic understanding, especially with TI working with sensation to arrive at tangible truth and intuition to arrive at intangible or abstract truths. Okay, so this axis with TI in the first and FE in the fourth, we can look at it as TI dealing with logic, as subjective thinking, and FE dealing with emotions, of course, on an objective level, objective feeling. So what happens is just the classic example of, if you want to think clearly and accurately about something, if you want to digest it logically, the feelings need to be turned off because they want to assess value to something, and that of course muddles the understanding, and it can kind of become inaccurate in that way. So what happens is that FE can be turned off so that TI as the dominant function can process things more clearly. And Jung himself, in his chapter, The Introverted Thinking Type, says, this negative relation to the object, ranging from indifference to aversion, characterizes every introvert and makes the description of the type exceedingly difficult, which I find to be very true. Everything about the TI DOM tends to disappear and get concealed. The judgment appears cold, inflexible, arbitrary, and ruthless because it relates far less to the object than to the subject. One can feel nothing in it that might possibly confer a higher value on the object. It always bypasses the object and leaves one with a feeling of the subject's superiority. So of course he's talking about TI in the first, and that subjective thinking and its ability to completely internalize and process that information in the TI DOM's head. So FE is turned off. If we look at FE as facial expressions, based on observations that I've made, TI DOMs, they can kind of have a face like that, where it's kind of emotionless, a bit like dead inside. And I'm not trying to be mean, it's just something that happens, that when TI is turned on, FE is turned off. I mean, just they can't work at the same time in that fashion. And it's really the same thing with TI and FI when TE is in the first slot. It's more of like a poker face. As far as to the details, maybe I'll get to that in another video, but it's just something that happens. And then another way of looking at this axis is, if we look at TI trying to judge information logically and accept it into its internal framework, once it's been accepted, we can say that since FE can be related to networking, FE, since it's in the fourth slot, it's playing that subordinate role to that dominant thinking. It's tasked with sort of gluing or putting these pieces of fragmentary information together to that internal framework that TI has built. FE sends it back to TI, and then it's accepted and expanded upon. Okay, so just to illustrate an example of TI, because it can be difficult to understand, let's just look at this as TI, and under it an internal framework. This is A, this is B, this is C. So Jung in his chapter says, introverted thinking is primarily oriented by the subjective factor. External facts are not the aim and origin of this thinking, though the introvert would often like to make this thinking appear so. It begins with the subject and leads back to the subject, far though it may range into the realm of actual reality. So just as an example, we can say that a piece of information is X, and TI wants to internalize, process, and judge this X logically through its internal framework. So what it'll do is send it down to A as a sort of test. It checks out with A, goes down and proceeds to B, same thing, it checks out, then it goes to C, and unfortunately C says that this is invalid and it cannot be accepted. It'll warn TI in that way. Now, will the TI DOM reject it right away? Most likely not, especially if X is a piece of valuable information. So what it'll do, it'll basically restart the test, and it'll sort of double check, okay, did I miss anything with A? No. Did I miss anything with B? No. Did I miss anything with C? Again, it's showing invalid, inconclusive, so it must be rejected. Now, like Jung said, really the ultimate goal of TI is to sort of take new pieces and fragments of information and loop them around so it finishes where it starts in that way, and it'll run through a system of checks and balances that the TI DOM has been building over time, and what they know personally to have worked. And one of the downsides of subjective thinking is that, say this TE DOM, they have their own understanding of C, and just as an example, we know that X is true, whereas C is saying that it is not true, even though C says that it's not true, and TI will reject it on this basis alone. It's really not TI to blame. It's more human error and the fact that we're all prone to making mistakes. However, on the bright side, we can also look at TI as a form of sort of productive thinking, in the sense that through its subjectivity, it can also offer creative, innovative, insightful solutions and conclusions to problems that are previously unsolvable by any means and methods that have been known to work in the past, and for some reason they keep failing. This new problem, TI through subjectivity can offer these almost genius solutions through the lens of subjectivity. Like I did with my FE and FI video, I think it would be helpful to just quickly compare these two functions. So we know that TI is introverted, therefore it's more deeper, more subjective, more internal. TE is extroverted, more faster, external, objective. Jung says TE is more est ergo est, so it is what it is. TI is more cogito ergo cogito, I think therefore I am. Now, these are both very logical, critical thinking functions, and I want to do this through the lens of the dominant slot. So TI DOMs, TE DOMs. TE will be more, it wants to construct, TI wants to deconstruct. TE wants to code, TI wants to decode. TE, I like to look at it as more macro-based, whereas TI is more micro-based. TE, it's more order, rules, structure, whereas TI, it really wants understanding. Now, these are priorities here. So TE values order, it prioritizes order, and it can arrive through understanding, it can arrive at understanding through order, whereas TI can arrive at order through understanding. It's what's being prioritized. The same thing with like facts and sources being valued by TE, whereas TI, it's the framework that comes first, and of the facts and sources to TI are secondary, like Jung mentioned. So a kind of like modern example of this would be, say we have a university professor and they're doing a course, they're very distinguished in their field, their work is well known, and they are doing a lecture, and they're talking about what's going to be on the test, for example, the final exam. TE, they're going to learn this information very fast. They're going to treat it as sort of innocent until proven guilty. I know that this is coming from a reputable source. I know that most likely this is going to be on the exam, and I'm just looking to do what I need to do in order to get my diploma and just keep moving forward no matter what. It's going to be very practical, very pragmatic, and even, deep in the future, if what that professor is saying turns out to be wrong, that's fine. They can just very quickly adapt. Whereas TI, it's going to be more like guilty until proven innocent. And I know that's a bit of an exaggeration. This is just a general example here. But TI, of course, they're going to take into consideration the professor's status. However, this is going to be extremely important to them, right? They're going to want to deconstruct, decode it, anything that they can do. They want to ask why. Same thing with these checks and balances, right? They really want to come to an understanding first in order to be able to accept what the professor is saying as valid and as truth, despite the status of the individual. And this kind of triggers very deep, complex thought, especially when NE and NI get into the picture. It's kind of like they lose track of reality and they enter this very deep, complex internal thinking. It's just something that happens very often with TI DOMs, since it's their dominant function. And very quickly, going back to TE DOMs, it's not that they're never going to ask why, it's just more that in order to do that, they're going to have to forfeit that objectivity that they really value and prioritize. And it's really FI that is going to question why, and why do they feel this way about the information, that sort of subjectivity. And because FI is going to be in the fourth in this situation, TE really just wants to move on and be productive, keep moving forward. All right, just as a final example here, let's take this person and we'll say that this is a friend of a TI DOM and they know something to be truthful and they're being nice and genuine about it, and they're trying to convince a TI DOM that whatever they're saying is true. Now, TI, like I've said, it correlates to the left hemisphere of the brain, deals with logic. What happens is, if this piece of information conflicts with the internal network and framework of the TI DOM, this person is going to encounter a huge resistance, even though it might not be readily apparent, because TI is an introverted function. It takes place internally in a deep, complex internal world. So on the outside, the TI Dom might be like, they might show hesitation, indecision, like, I don't know, that's interesting, just as an example. Whereas on the inside, TI is just going, no, 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 wrong. And this is just something that happens quite often. And the point I want to make here is that everything that I've said about TI can also be related to FI. However, the method is going to be completely different. TI is going to deal with logic, FI is going to deal with emotions, but both of these functions are similar in the way that they can judge information. So what happens is that TI will say not accurate, FI will say not authentic, because it doesn't agree with the emotions on FI's side and it doesn't agree with logic on TI's side. So what very often happens is that this person takes it the wrong way, and they think that the TI Dom or the FI Dom is judging them as not accurate, as wrong, which can of course be the case. But the point I'm trying to make here is that because TI is so deep and it's kind of like infinite thinking and it's always going on in the TI Dom's mind, they can't accept it, because then the TI Dom would not be accurate, not because this person would not be accurate. It really has nothing to do with it. Same thing with FI. FI can't accept it because then they wouldn't be authentic in that way, and it conflicts with their emotions. Almost always it's taken the wrong way because these two functions aren't very good at expressing it outwardly, whereas internally, a lot is going on inside of them. But this is just kind of an example of what happens a lot, and maybe you can take it and try and reword what you say and be more decisive in that way. Kind of like what TE or FE would do. They're just gonna be more objective and straight up and just say, no, I don't agree with you. And of course, this gets better with age. As you get older, these things will become more natural to you. It's just that, especially like through when you're a teenager or something, and you just disagree with them, or you say that, yeah, that's interesting, and then you go check it later, and then you confirm that it's wrong, and then you end up telling them, no, you're wrong. That can really spoil the relationship, and it can turn sour very quickly. I know we spent a bit more, a lot of time on TI. I wanted to kind of show how you can TI introverted thinking. TI is kind of like hacking, deconstructing. So, just breaking it up in introverted thinking. So break it to syllables. You can break it down into vowels and consonants, stressed and unstressed syllables. You can look at the Latin etymological roots of intro and vertere, like I did in my previous video, of thinking, as English as a Germanic language, denken as being phonetically similar to thinking. You can calculate the digital root of introverted thinking. Just as a quick example, T is the 19th letter of the English alphabet. I is the 9th letter, so 1 plus 9 is 10, plus 9 is 19, 1 plus 9 is 10 again, 1 plus 0 is 1, so the digital root of TI is 1. You can just keep hacking anything, words, numbers. That's what TI likes to do, and of course it's subjective. Everyone will have a different way of doing it. But anyways, I hope this video has helped. And as always, thanks for watching.